Thanks, Gene. I'm going to run through the first few slides here real quickly just to remind everybody how to get configured if you're not already configured. We are recording the webinar so that later on anybody who wants to take a look and listen to the conversation can do so, even if they weren't here at the time. Our group out here we call GIZMO, which stands for Generating Interesting Science and Math Opportunities. We sort of give it more of a nod to the science than anything because I'm a former scientist myself, but mostly we're about the mathematics. And Gene has been very kind to invite us to do this, and I really appreciate it. A couple of acknowledgments here. All of the work you'll see today has been funded by a combination of funds from the National Science Foundation, the Oak Foundation of North Carolina, and the Joseph B. Moore Endowment of North Carolina State University, through the good offices of our colleague and former head of program here, Jer Confrey. These are the tools on the Blackboard Collaborate participant interface, and if you have any trouble with this, just send a note to us through the chat, and we will try to resolve any issues that you might have. Teresa's already talking to Lisa, or Lynn, excuse me. So the emoticons there, the smiley faces and everything are here in the left side of the window. Polling, we may use this later on. Whiteboard tools, I'll make some use of some of those, and then down here is the chat box. And feel free to ask questions at any time, and I will try to pay attention for raised hands in the participants list there. Okay, so here's our official title and everything, but we've seen this already, so let's just go on. Also, I want to give a shout out to everybody who's been working on the project. Jer Confrey, who is the Joseph Moore University professor here at North Carolina State, is currently on leave from the university and working as the Chief Mathematics Officer at Wireless Generation, a New York-based company with her offices and her curriculum team offices over in Durham, which is about 20 miles away from Raleigh here. Myself, several people are listed as emeritus because they've moved on to other opportunities. Kenny Nguyen, Drew Corley, who's now working for Wireless, Cozy Lee, who is here, Nicole Connor-Koo, who is here, two graduate students on the project, Mara Veneri and Jim Nickel, Aisha Neal, Teresa, who's our current project manager, and our former project manager, Shirley Varela. And all the programming you'll see down on here has been conducted by Pedro Larios down in Austin, Texas. Here's what we're going to do today. I'm going to talk briefly about the Common Core context and the challenges that we face as we try to adopt and implement the Common Core in the schools and in the states. Talk about how to think about making sense of the Common Core standards as a teacher or as a curriculum director or as a teacher educator, and why learning trajectories. So I'll talk about learning trajectories and what they're good for. Then we'll do a tour of the TurnOnCCMath site and how we unpack the standards, give you a little bit of the history of how we got to this point with this site and the resources that are available on it. And talk a little bit then toward the end of the first half hour about teacher responses to learning trajectories, and turn to the TurnOnCCMath site and give you a preview of what are the other resources that are to come here on the site, because we are developing this as a larger project to build lots of professional development support resources for interpreting the Common Core standards with learning trajectories. So as all of you probably know, 45 of the states and the District of Columbia, as well as my favorite place for education, since I'm a product of that, the Department of Defense Educational Authority, have adopted the Common Core standards as of June of this past year. And just a note, the next several slides, we'll talk a little bit about the context in which we found ourselves, say, if you go back 10, 15, 20 years, and what we find ourselves in now in terms of standards and accountability in educational, the general educational context. As you can see, I'm on the left side. We were beginning with the NCTM standards, which is a remarkable accomplishment that had two different versions of it. We moved for accountability in across the nation had found most of the states creating their own educational standards. The No Child Left Behind law came into place, and perhaps the most significant part of NCLB from the standpoint of many people is the fact that it required us to disaggregate student performance data. And that helped us understand more about the gaps in student achievement and led to a number of instances of people questioning how it is that you can give the same opportunity to learn to everybody in the country, and that is still a major problem that has not been solved, of course. At that time, back in 1995, say, we had some technology applications. We had the beginnings of computers in classrooms and so forth. Graphing calculators were established by then. The internet was coming into schools, but still there was minimal access to most schools. And always in the background, we have a very highly mobile student as well as a mobile teacher population, which raised all kinds of questions for ensuring that any students who moved from one district to another or greater changes by moving from one state to another were basically a coherent educational system. They were not in those days. And the transition to the Common Core State Standards is a major effort to smooth some of those difficulties out. Eventually, we will now see a new authorization for the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. No Child Left Behind is probably going to undergo considerable changes. We now, however, also have transformative issues going on around us. The abundance of wireless networking, cloud computing, and let me know, we are having storms out here in Raleigh right now, and if you saw flickering of the lights in our room here, it's because we're having periodic power outages. The building has a backup system, so we shouldn't have much interruption, but if you see this flickering, that's what's going on. So as I was saying, the wireless networking and cloud computing are virtually omnipresent for people in their private lives, as well as across many of the businesses and agencies, the government and the public sector, as well as the private sector. We all know that kids and their social networking are linked hand in hand 24/7. Point out that there's an enormous amount of empirical research in science and in business where the use of very large data sets and crunching the data through analytic processes has changed the way science is done, has changed the way business and marketing is done, and has made different demands as well as offered opportunities on our understanding of how students can learn quantitative issues in literacy. The knowledge-intensive industries and the push toward STEM is huge. We still have, and maybe even more so, increasing mobile student and teacher populations, and we are very much aware, many of us are very much aware, of course, of the issues of opportunity by zip code, depending on where you live. And this is not simply by ethnic breakdown or socioeconomic necessarily, but basically where you live can be a major determinant in what kind of opportunities to learn you may have. The next couple of slides I'm not going to go through, but they are a list of issues that are facing and plaguing and presenting opportunities for all of us in education. But it's just sort of the background, the milieu that we're working in, and remind you that Common Core standards are just one of many large-scale changes that are taking place. I want to make the point a little bit later on that it's big changes that are going to take many years to shake out. Bill Schmidt, who has done a lot of analysis of standards across different nations, had constructed a hypothetical, what he called an A+ set of international standards. And he made the comment, observation that this here states with past mathematics standards that were more similar to the Common Core standards and more similar to the Common Core standards are more similar to the A+ set of standards he constructed from international standards. Those states had statistically significant higher NAEP scores in 2009. It's just one little anecdote to remind us that the Common Core standards do look like they are going to make a difference. So what's their significance? The list of items presented here. They're fewer, they're clearer, they're higher. They can also be of widely varying grain size, which is one of the reasons that we created the TurnOnCCMath site. They definitely embed expectations for higher level reasoning and higher level thinking skills, and this is going to be reinforced by the task design for the new assessments that are being created by the PARC and Smarter Balanced Consortium, among other things. They have been deliberately structured to incorporate student learning research and to support the use of learning trajectories. We believe that the uniformity and the coherence of the standards across the states that result from states adopting the same set of standards are going to bring very large economies of scale with respect to curriculum design, development, and sales, availability, the same for assessment, and hopefully the same for professional development as well. And I would add probably for teacher education. There are hopes that it will buffer for the effects of student mobility and the dislocation of students' experience in moving from district to district and from state to state. That will remain to be seen, but I think there's good reason to believe that that's going to be a major plus of the common core standards. We hope it'll turn out to support equity and customization both. And always in the background are the aspects of digital learning and the use of real-time data, which are going to, in the very short term, very near term here, going to start affecting states and individual schools and individual teachers. But I want to remind everyone, you all are probably already quite aware of this. This is not business as usual. It's not just a matter of adopting a new set of standards and saying, okay, they're pretty much like the old set of standards. They are more demanding. There are new topics. There are more intensive topics. The pacing of them is different in many strands. The new assessments are going to present massive challenges to states and districts across the country because of the new problem types and because of the increased intensity of the standards and the expectations. We have the urgency that still remains to address student performance gaps and all of the aspects of digital aspects of education, from being able to monitor large student populations across time is a huge advantage in some ways. The teacher evaluation systems are going to be challenging, and the monitoring of test results is going to prove a major challenge. But I would say that it also offers some major opportunity because it can strengthen our understanding of the topics, strengthens teachers' abilities to plan their instruction, and bring a level of coherence to it. So let's talk a little bit about, I'm just going to briefly touch on this because many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this already, the standards that are more demanding and that have new or more intensified topics. Most important at the first glance, I think, are that the 8 mathematical practices are identified and made explicit in the Common Core standards, and we are attempting to read them in various groups that have been developing support materials are attempting to weave them into the content all the way through. There are big changes in content and grade expectations in K-5, 6-8, and in high school. Some of the content is happening earlier. Some of the content, as you probably are aware, those of you who teach middle school, ratio and proportion in particular, and statistics and probabilistic reasoning are delayed through so that they're basically not present in elementary school and hit very hard right off the bat in 6th grade. And that is a huge challenge for middle school teachers and administrations. And then I'm not even going to talk much about this, but the interdisciplinary content standards that are built into the ELA standards for reading and writing in science and the technical subjects offer lots of opportunities for cross-collaboration between English and social science teachers and math and science teachers. But that's basically all I'm going to say about that. I don't believe that the standards and the collaborations are ongoing in various places, but I'm not myself personally familiar with the curriculum. So these are the 8 mathematical practices. You all are familiar with them. We take the perspective that this is the doing of mathematics. You have a high level of attention now paid through the standards on the reasoning. This used to be more related to the process standards. I think they've been made more explicit and embedded as part and parcel of the Common Core State Standards document, and that's a huge plus for the document. But you can't do practices without content, so the practices and the content have to be woven together in canon. And I would just like to suggest, and I know many places are beginning to think this way, that the mathematical practices, combined with appropriate rubrics for understanding what's going on in a classroom discourse situation, and rubrics for understanding the cognitive load of various questions and items that are presented in classes. The practice may provide a good way to help people who are not mathematics teachers or mathematics curriculum specialists. Many administrators, of course, fall into that category. To nonetheless observe classrooms more deeply and more circumspectly to see how the content is being made understandable, challenging, and engaging to students, and the level of student engagement with each other and with the content and practices. These practices offer hope for that. So the long-term goal is full implementation of the Common Core. Crosswalks are necessary, but they're not sufficient because crosswalks don't necessarily help you know how areas and strands are actually restructured. And I would suggest that, of course, you have to understand what the content embodied in each standard is, but the idea of teaching to a standard, standard by standard, or assessing a standard, standard by standard, is not sufficient. It may not be appropriate for people to follow anyway, because that leaves out the issue of how concepts develop over time. So that's just a quick comment to help you pave the way for understanding how to develop the term Common Math and monitor generation. So the takeaway message is basically here, there are a lot of challenges involved in the Common Core standards and implementing them, but there are huge opportunities for the improvements that they're going to help lead to. Middle grades, of course, is going to be critical to student success. Other discussion we can have later, we can talk about this in more specific terms. From our standpoint as educational researchers and people who work on learning trajectories and just with various levels of practical experience in the classroom, elementary grade instruction is critical to everything. It is particularly critical to preparing kids for middle school in ways that are even more important and weighty, if you will, than it used to be. And these other points in here are touched on. It is a big undertaking. It's important to focus on meaningful implementation of the Common Core standards and the positive impact that implementation should have and should be planned to have on both student learning and on student achievement. But whereas right now the emphasis has been on implementing by the time, full implementation in the schools by the time the Race to the Top has run its course and the new summative assessments are in place. It's important to recognize that there is so much content and so much transition that can be made that we really regard it as a generational project. 10 to 20 years before the Common Core standards are fully implemented and models are put in place for revising them as time goes on. And therefore, for those of you who are veteran teachers already, you can also think of these the standards as a kind of a legacy to the younger type teachers in our profession, because they're the ones who, as they come up, are going to be in the environment in which Common Core standards are just a given. So how do you make sense of them, though? And how do you support them? How do you use them to support and improve both instruction and learning? We regard it as a challenge, as I've written here, to both representation and meaning, and those two are intertwined. So there's issues of continuity. How do you support conceptual growth of students from year to year so that the cumulative nature of mathematics learning is really supported and that the conceptual development of children is strengthened, not just the skills or procedures. We know that there are brain size variations in the Common Core standards, and we know that if you sit down to try to read the Common Core standards, you'll get a sense of where they are, but as with most standards documents, it's hard to understand what the continuity is from year to year. So one of the challenges we took up is to try to figure out how better to visually represent them. There are issues, of course, of classroom discourse to support these conceptual development as well. From the standpoint of teachers who are already teaching, what are the issues for you all at the transition? What are the issues of stepping up versus retrofitting your own understanding of the field. All of these issues come up in conversations. And for pre-service teachers, those who are in colleges and schools of education and learning to become teachers, how do we ensure that they start their careers assuming the Common Core standards? What does that mean in terms of their own practice? So what learning trajectories do is to combine research on student learning of mathematics from the research community as well as from teachers' experience and instruction in mathematics. It's a larger sense. I want to emphasize right as we start our discussion on learning trajectories here that we understand and regard that mathematics learning by students is not synonymous simply with the structure of the discipline of mathematics. When you think about the fact that the discipline of mathematics has spent 500 to 2,000 years, depending on where you start, in making an elegant, self-coherent structure that has a very compressed and elegant representation, symbolism, and language. Students can't generally just step into that and have a full-blown understanding of concepts. They learn these concepts differently depending on what their environment is, what their prior knowledge has been, technology that's available to them, those kind of factors. So the Common Core standards were built explicitly by the writers to incorporate learning progressions or learning trajectories. We use the term interchangeably. And they anticipated that eventually the Common Core standards would be revised based on additional research in student learning. The entire story certainly has not been written. There's much research to be done in how students develop various concepts and understandings. So let's begin learning trajectories for a bit here. I'm going to check and see. I'm going to move to the website fairly quickly, but I want to give you a quick overview of what a learning trajectory is. I'll skip a few slides in here because we can come back to those later in the discussion and you can read them on your own later. Basically the way we conceive of it is students come into a classroom with prior knowledge. They have various obstacles and landmarks that help them develop understanding of concepts, intermediate understandings, misconceptions that teachers and students together deal with, and the eventual goal is to come out after time with a variety of learned ideas that we sometimes refer to as domain goal understandings. These are a couple of different but consistent definitions of what learning trajectories are. Check out those later, but they emphasize big ideas, right? Describe the transition from prior knowledge to targeted understandings. Most importantly, give you a sense of how students, based on research, lots of teacher experience over a body of knowledge that's been accumulated for the past 10 years, how to identify intermediate understanding with students and how they can contribute to their growth in that understanding. I think I would come back to this one and go straight to the website. So I'll show you how TurnOnCCMath uses learning trajectories, and we use the learning trajectories
the 2.0, yeah.
Into the Common Core. So our current version of the website looks like this when you go to it. You click on the address is TurnOnCCMath.net, and what I'm going to do now is just give you a live demo of the site, and we'll go from here directly to the site. So if you click on the map there, you'll get this, which is information. You can come back and look at this later, and I'll just show you how you can get through it. So this is the hexagon map that we developed a couple of years ago as soon as the Common Core standards came out. It was based on a number of hexagon maps that we had developed for state standards around the country. And from our own experience and part of the revised and revamped the North Carolina Essential Standards back in 2009 from the standpoint of learning trajectories. So each hexagon has a single one of the standards. All of the K-8 standards are represented here. And each one of them is labeled. There are 18 learning trajectories that we have identified. There is nothing sacrosanct about these learning trajectories, but we have woven them together in order to build what we consider from our own background and from our understanding of literature, as well as our work on several of them ourselves, what seems to be a good conjectured set of learning trajectories for the Common Core. If you mouse over any hexagon, you will see in the lower left corner the hexagon full text come up. You'll also see the learning trajectory highlighted. And to point out one more thing before I move, you can also zoom in by this button, this slider here. And it's built something like Google Maps, so it will refresh. And when you zoom in far enough, you'll be able to actually read the shorthand version of this standard and see the alphanumeric designation for the standards. So every one of the K standards is represented here, and each one per hexagon. Those that have subparts, as you'll see right here, 5MD.3.B is just one of the several pieces of standard 5.MD.3. Measurement of data is the domain name for the Common Core document itself. I'm going to zoom back out here, and we will go and select length, area, and volume. It's a big trajectory, it has a lot of content in it. When you select the learning trajectory, you see this window pop open. This is what we call the descriptor window. And it's a floating window. There are links up here that will take you to different sections of the learning trajectory. A structural overview of the learning trajectory is shown here. And one of the things about length, area, and volume that I'll emphasize is that there is a repeating structural or conceptual unit, coherent structure we refer to it, in which the concept of the development of the concept of length and length measurement is then repeated when you start considering area, and then repeat it again when you start considering volume. Because the dimension, of course, changes. One finds that there is additional material and additional considerations conceptual development, but the overall structure.
Yeah, but they're separated in the key.
Similar to the 3D cameras. If you scroll down in there, you will see that each standard.
Oh, it's light blue on here. Chance probability is light blue in the key.
Inside. And they are put in order for
Alright, whatever, I'm just...
And basically builds a learning trajectory out of it. There are several of these. There are several sort of mini trajectories.
Completely wrong, that's all I'm saying.
Visible under each of the sections.
I don't know how to fix it.
On the right-hand side of the table is the descriptor, which
Good
is
stuff.
a detailed description of what the content of this, in the context of the learning trajectory, how we unpack the standard so that it's part of a continual development of conceptual understanding for the kids. Now you'll notice also that we have other standards in here that are in brown text. These are what we call bridging standards. And these standards are not actually standards that are in the Common Core, but they are standards that we have added to the learning trajectories in order to make a more fluid transition from one standard to another, that one of the Common Core standards to another, and fills in conceptual gaps or makes transitions so that they can support you in your instruction of kids as they develop their further understanding of these topics. For instance, in this early part in the kindergarten standard of describing measurable attributes of objects, we've added a bridging standard that encourages description and distinction of spatial attributes of, so here's where you actually get into defining and distinguishing between length, area, and volume. This is an important bridging standard to have in here based on research that has been done in a number of different groups around the country over the past number of years. So as you scroll down, you'll see these standards build. These are all kindergarten standards so far, but now you're moving into the next year of schooling, into the first grade standards, as you can see here, ordering objects by length, comparing the lengths of two objects indirectly using the third object. Yes, Tracy just called my attention to the fact that your screens are probably loading more slowly than mine because I'm originating it here. So you can move the site around yourself as well on your own laptops there. Let me pause for a moment and see if any of you have particular questions. I'm going to scroll back through the chat. Brenda asks what the colors represent. Let me go back to the map here and close the window. We have two views, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit so we can get the full picture here. We have two views of the hexagon map. This one shows across grades. Slide that up so it's a little easier to see. Wait for a second for everybody's screen to catch up. I have a second computer here that I'm now understanding how to watch to see how it's likely that people at remote sites are seeing the map scroll. So if in this is the view that we call the learning trajectory view, and this shows learning trajectories that go across grade. You can compare this if you go up here to the upper right hand corner and roll your mouse over that square icon that has hexagons on it, and it will allow this by grade level to open up. You click on that, and you'll see a different view of the same hexagon map show up. So now the colors in this one represent, if you pay attention primarily to the background colors, they proceed from kindergarten standards, here, 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 and there. So the white background indicates Common Core standards for kindergarten. The light gray background color indicates first grade. There, there, here, and all of these. And the next shade of gray indicates second grade. You move to third grade, fourth grade. And we've just recently made some changes so that when you mouse over one of them, they're supposed to highlight all of those at the same grade, but I can see that there's a bit of a lag. We're still working on making that transition. So kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth. The yellow is fifth, the green is sixth. 7 is in yellow, again, an orangish yellow, and then the red background are the 8th grade standards. That's right. Okay. I'll switch back to the learning trajectory view, and you'll see the map change again. Now the question popped up of how the 8 mathematical practices fit in the learning trajectories. Because the learning trajectories are about both practice and content, we have not explicitly highlighted instances where you would use the mathematical practices explicitly, but they are woven in throughout. And as you read the text of that, you will see that there are varieties of comments made in the learning trajectory descriptors that refer to either standards explicitly or talk about how the discourse might proceed in class. So we have not tried at this point to identify, sort of in a task-based sense, which particular practices are relevant to a particular task necessarily. So let's see, we're back here now on the learning trajectory version, the labeled version of the map, and the colors here are showing you an individual learning trajectory, which is then reinforced by the strong borders around each learning trajectory. So here's the elementary data and modeling one. There's variation, distribution of modeling. And I forgot to mention that in the hexagon map, as you will have seen from the grade level version, the standards themselves are oriented from youngest grade levels and proceed from the lower left of any particular section. So these are the kindergarten standards out here, kindergarten and first grade standards in this area, all the way up to the 8th grade, and therefore more sophisticated reasoning and more complex topics in the upper right. So basically proceeds from lower left to upper right. And we use the hexagon structure in order to basically give a spatial reference for more connections among different topics and different standards. It's still not perfect. If you wanted to draw a mental map of how all of these topics proceed, presumably you start building a 3-dimensional hologram, but that's still a ways off, I'm afraid. Let's see. Let's see if there are other questions. Any other questions I think there is? Did Brenda ask the question of whether there would be one like this? I'm assuming you mean the hexagon map for 6th through 12th. Just to remind that this hexagon map that you're looking at now covers K through 8th. We do not have one for high school. Our specialties are in kindergarten through 8th, even though we did build the learning trajectories charts, which were more standards progressions that are put in the format of learning trajectories. But the high school standards, we have not attempted to tackle yet. Okay, learning trajectories that are most critical for understanding the newer intensified topics in the Common Core standards. I would say the division and multiplication one, it gives it a different take on models of division and multiplication for K-8. Very important to cover equal partitioning because, as our own research has indicated, equal partitioning lays a foundation for rational number reasoning by looking at children's early reasoning in equal groups and the relationship between parts and wholes. It's come out of some of the research on fractions that has bigger implications. So for the K-5, I would say equal partitioning, which is well developed in the descriptors, and multiplication and division. We're preparing a revision of the division and multiplication one. It's a fairly complex, big learning trajectory, but it does include multiplication and division of fractions in that trajectory rather than in the fractions trajectory, because it involves the movement to rational number and understanding structures of fractions in ways that are more than just fractions as numbers. And then once one gets into middle school, the two big ones, probably no surprise to those of you who teach middle school, are the variation, distribution, and modeling here, because that's basically statistics. And it starts heavy duty in grade 6, and it lays the foundation for getting into probability modeling and statistical inference in high school. And then the other one is ratio and proportion and percents. And again, part of the intensity that comes that accompanies the statistical trajectory and the ratio trajectory is because early on the Common Core writers had made a determination that statistics and probability reasoning were not going to be addressed for the most part in grade school, and likewise for ratio. However, in both of those learning trajectories, we have either bridging standards or introductions within the descriptors that talk about the conceptual gains that children should make in elementary school to set them up for handling these really intensified topics in 6th grade. And then probably the other one, I'll slide this down here, is chance and probability. Together, variation, distribution, and modeling, and chance and probability set students up for integrating probabilistic reasoning with statistical or stochastic reasoning in order to begin to deal in deep ways with statistical reasoning, statistical modeling in high school. Some of you probably know the high school statistics standards are themselves more intensified, and students in middle school need to get a good grounding in these two learning trajectories before they get to the high school courses, because the statistics can be handled beginning in 9th grade. Okay, how do these differ from Bill McCallum's learning progressions? They overlap, but they're not the same, they're distinct. McCallum's progressions are really more standards progressions, and they are articulating details and tasks and problems that are associated with the individual standards, and I think they're a very valuable resource. I would recommend that people adopting the Common Core standards get very familiar with both the IME, the Institute for Mathematics Education, standards progressions documents, as well as ours here. They come at the topic from slightly different, well, quite a bit different perspectives. Ours are specifically based on the research and student learning, and the ones with the standards progressions that Bill McCallum and his crew are building are more explicating individual standards. These two may become more overlapping as time goes on, because both groups are paying attention to each other. I think that's what I can say about that one. And question coming up? Right. So we can talk a little bit more about bridging standards. In the Common Core standards, from the standpoint of learning trajectories and the research on student learning, the bridging standards are meant to fill in gaps that might not otherwise be readily addressed if you're just reading the standards and trying to make sure that you're covering the standards. Because of those gaps, or because of the difference in grain size of topics, see what I want to say about this, the bridging standards were inserted wherever we felt that there was an instructional gap that was not covered by the Common Core standards themselves, even after we had arranged some of them to pull them out of one strand and put them in another strand in order to make a learning trajectory. Let's see if I can find an example. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint here, because I have a couple of slides to show you some instances of those. That's one by way of resets. Okay. So I want to highlight a little bit, and I'll get back to the discussion of bridging standards, but I want to spend a little bit of time talking about elements of the individual descriptors, and this may help fill in some of the texture of what the bridging standards are trying to accomplish. As we built the descriptors, we realized that partly by intention and partly by emergence of patterns, we have identified and started to highlight 5 different elements within each descriptor. First and most important from the standpoint of student learning are the strategies, the representations, and the misconceptions that students will express as they are learning various of these topics. Another one is underlying cognitive or conceptual principles within the individual learning trajectories. Another is to pay attention to mathematical distinctions and multiple models for various contexts. It parallels the mathematical distinctions and multiple models elements, parallels the idea of multiple representations for various concepts. And I'll give you a couple of examples of those in a moment. And then I referred to this when I was showing you the length area and volume learning trajectory as well, but coherent or repeating structures within the learning trajectories or within the particular topic that emerge from the standpoint of student learning as well. And then finally, the bridging standards. So what I'd like to do is give you some examples from a couple of the learning trajectories. I've got a couple of examples from K-5 trajectories and a couple from middle school level. I'm going to jump right now to the coherent structure and just emphasize a moment. This is the length, the length area and volume learning trajectory. And I point out here that it was developed from student learning research on length, area, and volume measurement. It came out of groups Doug Clements and Julie Sarama, who used to be at the University of Buffalo, Jackie Barrett at Illinois State, Mike Batista now at Ohio State, Rich Lair at Vanderbilt, and our group here at Illinois State, and their colleagues. And here's the structural overview again, which showed a minute ago. This is the module, the structural module that is repeated for length, for area, and for volume. Children first have to understand how to define the attribute of length and compare it with attributes of area and attributes of volume. The conservation principle that if you break a length in something that has length up into various pieces and put it back together, you still maintain the same length. The ability to directly compare two lengths or objects with length in order to understand differences in length, and then be able to begin to develop tools to indirectly compare two objects for their length. And then measurement, the essence of measurement at this point is then to actually be able to assign units and to measure with no gaps and overlaps along a length of an object. And then the compensatory principle, if you change the size of the unit, I should back up one moment. Measuring with multi-axial overlaps is where you also begin to assign particular units in order to make measurements and iterate those units along a length later in the case of area within the area. The compensatory principle is something students have to understand too, which is they come to this after measuring itself, is that if you use a larger unit to measure the same length, you get fewer of those units, and vice versa. If you measure an object, the length of an object with smaller units, you'll end up with a unit to measure that has more units in it for that. That's a compensation between unit size and number of units in length. And then finally, the additive principle is in play here, which is basically quickly stated is that if you put two lengths together, the lengths simply add. And so the two objects that are put together and the overall length of the total object is found by adding the lengths of the smaller component objects. Now this structure is repeated when one begins to learn about area and volume measurement with additional twist, because you're now using area units or volume units, and to make those units or to make measurements from length units, you move into dimensional analysis, which gets you into the multiplicative principle, where you students generate the understanding of area formulas and multiplication of two length measurements to get units in terms of new units, which are area units, 2 dimensions, and likewise for volume. So this basic structure of building up your understanding of what it is to measure is repeated. It was first introduced as length and measuring, understanding and measuring length, and then understanding and measuring area, and finally understanding and measuring volume. So that's what we refer to as the coherent structure. In terms of bridging standards, I want to move to highlighting ratio and proportion and percents. And the learning trajectory here was developed from a collection of research that started 30 years ago in a large NSF funded project called the Rational Number Project, which you can still go to the original research there. People like Merlin Baird, Gershon Harrell, Tom Post, Kathy Kramer, and as well as ourselves and a number of other people. As with many of these other learning trajectories, a lot of the understanding of how the learning trajectories and student learning fits together is synthesized from different strands of research. So ratio we introduce as a new form of equivalence and introduce tools like ratio tables and building up through ratio boxes. I just want to emphasize that, for instance, the 6RP1 standard says understand the concept of a ratio and use ratio language to describe a ratio relationship between two quantities. The bridging standard we added in shortly after that is to express the concept of a ratio using different tools and using ways to move from one set of values to the next set of values, using doubling, tripling, or splitting. We wanted to make that explicit because the 6RP1 didn't really offer enough detail to help understand how student learning progressed in order to become more fluent with the whole concept of a ratio before you get them to identify ratio units. Likewise, we added another bridging standard, and there are several bridging standards added in here that we probably, if we had had our druthers, we would try to instruct, help build students' understanding of ratio through these different bridging standards in probably 4th or 5th grade. But here is to make the distinction between the concept of a ratio unit, or as we say here, a base ratio, which then later on we understand is the lowest, is the smallest of whole numbers that defines a ratio. And then a unit ratio is the ratio in which one of the two values of the ratio is equal to 1. And that launches you into unit rate. Ratio unit is rational number, and unit ratio corresponds to unit rate. So these kinds of bridging standards are set up to help teachers in their instruction help students anticipate the concepts that have to be more fleshed out later on and that didn't need to be concluded. But these help set the underpinning for that conceptual. Now, the variation, I'm going to move to another middle grades example, which is the one for variation, distribution, and modeling, which is the other learning, the other set of standards that are so intensely begun in 6th grade. And the 6th grade topics basically involve describing distributions, describing data, and moving from what students typically do as younger students is look for themselves, or what data point represents them, and moving into understanding data as an aggregate, as a distribution, and what the various aspects of distribution of data can be. This was developed from student learning research on statistical reasoning, again from a wide variety of researchers across the country and internationally. So this slide illustrates basically 2 or 3 examples of each of the elements of the variation, distribution, and modeling learning trajectory. And I'll just go through a couple of these. The strategies and descriptions and representations and misconceptions that one sees students developing as they begin to be familiar with concepts are making ordered lists and then making case value clumps. There's this progression of ways to describe and measure variation without even getting into formulas necessarily, but getting the whole conceptual picture of what data look like and how you think and talk about it. And this requires students to do. Students will generate many of these on their own given the appropriate challenges, and then they will help to interpret what the different representations tell them and what they don't tell them, and how they help them reason in different ways. And these range all the way from pictographs all the way up to box plots. Students often will initially believe that because there's variation in a set of data, that it means that there's instruction in a set of data that you can't really say anything about something that you have measured if it varies. But that is a misconception that should be addressed in the picture and the descriptors. The underlying a pair of the underlying cognitive principles that are built into this learning trajectory are that distributions have shape, center, and spread. There are structured sets of data that you can identify, and then with identifying those sets of data, students can begin to talk about them and now ask more questions about them. And that there are multiple ways of thinking about issues of synthesis, typicality, balance, and all of these different ways. And as students get more experience with them, these words begin to have more specific meaning to them and become part of their vocabulary and reasoning. I'm going to drop down to the issue of coherent structure and talk about one of the things about this particular learning trajectory is that the structure within it is all oriented around the issue of conducting statistical investigations and the issue of modeling. And we have a statistical model, which has become part of the student's vocabulary by this time. You want to examine what the representations that you use to describe it show and what they hide, what they tell you that you can do with it and how you can reason with it, and what things are left unsaid or unknowable from a particular representation. And representations are models. Let's see. So we're getting close to time. And I want to show you we're in the process of, we're almost done building a new launch for the website, and it's going to have some more information at the front end that should make it easier to use. What I want to do is try to go live now to that and show you. It's not actually accessible to everyone, but I want to give you a little bit of that. I think if I can do this real quickly, we'll have just a second. Look. Still have to get on the stage and start it. So it's showing Sorry about this. share this room. So I'll give you a look here. You'll notice that we've rearranged the front page of this considerably, and we will now have a more complete introduction to touring and understanding how this entire set of learning trajectories is structured and how it relates to the hexagon map. How you navigate. So this is just a quick intro to show you that in a couple of weeks we'll have this all launched, and when you go to the site, it'll have a different front end to it. I'm sure people understand that it's not a different site, it's the same one. So we are basically up to our time limit for the webinar today. I want to make sure you all, so when we finish here and you leave the site, it will take you to the TurnOnCCMath.net page, and I wanted to leave you with contact information, URLs. For anyone to, we are extremely interested in having feedback from anybody who is using the site to tell us how you like it, what's working, what's not working for you, and any suggestions you would have to either make it more useful to you in your daily practice and your implementation of the Common Core. I want to step back for just a moment and let you know that we are in the midst of revising all of the learning trajectories to provide even more detail and provide citations to the research literature for all of the learning trajectories. So for people who are interested, they can find literature from both research and practitioner journals that will give them even more detail about how the learning trajectory, how the research literature fits into the learning trajectories. We are sending them out sequentially to external experts. We are by no means, you can see from the scope of the site, that we are not by no means experts in every single aspect of student learning research. So what we are doing is we're sending them out to several people in each learning trajectory field who are to get additional detail from them and make sure that we've covered all the transitions that students make, as much as is known by research at this point. We are basically taking an approach that for practitioners to understand the learning trajectories and how they weave in, how the Common Core weaves into them, and vice versa. We are trying to develop 3 different grain size presentations. We have presentations and workshops that we're putting around the country, but those, of course, are short sessions that don't give you enough detail. We are building PowerPoints for each of those that will be available as it is finished on our website that give more detail about how the learning trajectories are woven into the Common Core standards. And finally, we are getting ready to do a pilot of our first MOOC. And if you haven't heard about MOOCs, that stands for Massive Open Online Courses. These are going to be 4 to 6 week online courses that are available to anyone who wants to participate, that will give a more fine-grained tour through each one or 2 or 3 learning trajectories at a time. Those will be asynchronous. They'll be supported with video snippets, basically, that will introduce each of the topics. There will be tasks. There will be opportunities for groups of teachers and other participants to discuss the content and the topics in the courses as the weeks progress. And then those will be broadly available afterwards as well. They'll all be recorded. And we've addressed the issues about the learning trajectories from high school standards. I'm hoping that over the next year or so we'll be able to develop a collaborative project that builds from high school. That remains off in the future. And we're going to improve and diversify the visualizations of the connections among the LTs eventually, so that those of you who want to get more bang for your buck from the learning trajectories, have visual ways of representing how the various learning trajectories are connected, and critical standards that leverage student conceptual development to feed into multiple topic areas. So, I guess it's just a little bit after 5 out where you all are, and I'll move to the final slide for this, but I want you to make sure you understand that there are, the slides that I've showed you are about half of what the material that I prepared for this, so we will post this on our website, and any of you who wish to download the PowerPoint, feel free to do so. So here we are. Once again, the website address, our homepage for our research group here. Any concerns if you have, you can email to the general clearinghouse email we have, gizmoproject@ncsu.edu, or you can email either me or Teresa with questions or issues. And finally, I wanted to say thank you for joining us. I'm really pleased to see how many people joined us. And Jean, one more time, thank you so much for organizing, and I'm hoping that it'll be useful to you, and we will hear from some of you again down the road to help us understand how to make it more useful to you.
Yes, thank you, Alan.
Yes, thank you, Alan.
And just to remind you all that once you all leave the webinar, you'll be automatically redirected toward TurnOnCCMath.net if you want to explore further. I think with that, Jean, if you have anything to add as we finish up?
No, I think you've done a great job.
I think you've done a great job. Thank you, Alan.
Okay, then we will sign off for now, and any of you who want to stay around for a few minutes, we'll just stay online here, and we can respond to any other questions you have if you have time and interest.